Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab. We are super glad that you are with us today. Our goal on this podcast is conversations that help empower healthy churches. We're super excited for one of those again today for you. Before we get to that, my name is Scott and I help host, and this is Casey. She helps host. Together, we host this podcast. Hey, Casey, how are you?
What's up, Scott? How are you?
Great. I cannot complain. Yeah, I feel like so far this year's going well. We were talking before. I'll give listeners a little insight. We were talking before we hit record about our temperature issues and how we regulate those. I got my space heater going. I'm feeling good about that. It's a fake fireplace. Nobody's going to see it, but I see it. It looks beautiful, so I can't complain.
I don't know if you can hear. I hope not. It is pouring rain outside, and it just got really dark. So all I want to do is to have a real fireplace and take a nap.
And you're in Oklahoma, so there could be a tornado any minute. So
any minute. I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but every Wednesday at noon, they test the tornado sirens. Yeah. So that's a fun fact to not tell people who are visiting sometimes, who are like, yeah, it's like, your friends in California have earthquakes and people that live in hurricane zones. Like, we just don't tell visitors about the test. And every Wednesday, like, what do we do? What do we do? And we're like, oh my gosh, this is the end. We're like, just kidding.
You should just start running, Wednesday. Like running to your basement or something.
Just
like grab the go bag. Like, we got to go. Right. That would be hilarious. Yeah. They do
just
that
for fun.
They do that here in the Chicago area every first Tuesday of the month. See, we don't have as many tornadoes. You kind of live in that world. So it's like we just need to test once a month. They're like, we should probably test every day by you.
All the time, right? Just to make sure. But I feel like it's a false sense of security, because then you hear it so often when it's real. You're like, it's just the test. No. Well, this is real.
If you cut off of this podcast without explanation, listeners will know.
It was nice seeing you.
It's for real. Well, not nice seeing you. You're going to make it through. Like, we're confident of that. Come on now. But I got to go. I can't record this podcast right now.
Right.
All good.
It's got other priorities.
Yeah, understandably. Yeah.
But not today. So we're good.
Yeah, we're not going to have that. And instead, we're going to have an awesome conversation today. Really excited to have on the podcast today Miriam Dicks. Miriam is the CEO and founder of the 180 Management Group. And she is an operations leader with tons of experience in transforming organizations really to achieve optimal operational performance. Now, over the past 20 plus years, she's held several different positions in operations management, operations consulting, as well as serving in teaching roles in various operations courses. But also, and one of the things we're excited to kind of talk about the connection with is that prior to starting 180 Management Group, Miriam spent 15 years working for organizations in the for-profit and nonprofit sectors, and also has spent several years in ministry operations roles in the local church. She's a sought-after speaker, trainer, and Miriam, we are so happy to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here and looking forward to a wonderful conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're going to jump in. The first thing we ask everybody, we share your public bio, but we always love to dig just a little bit deeper and ask, what's something that doesn't make that public bio that all your friends and family would know about you?
Oh my gosh. That I am an avid Marvels fan.
Okay. All right. All right. Let's hear about that.
Say more.
So it was back in 2008, Iron Man came out.
Yeah.
And that was one of the first Marvel movies. And I was hooked, from Iron Man. And we've watched as a family every movie that has come out since then.
Nice.
It's one of those franchises where we could actually take our kids to the movie and watch it together. Right. And so, you really don't find that a lot these days. And even I would say, that's 14, 15, let me count, almost 16 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, that does not sound right. That doesn't seem right. 2008 is like 5 years ago. Oh, right. Gosh.
So 16 years ago, I had a 3-year-old a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. And so Marvel movies, they were fun, adventurous. We were talking about superheroes, and it was something that we could do together as a family. 16 years later, they may have changed a little, maybe a little more edgy, but but I'm still a fan.
I love it. Well, then that brings up another question. If you had to pick one Marvel movie to watch for 1 year, you can't watch any other, but you have, anytime you want to watch a Marvel movie, you have to watch this one. I'm not going to say forever because it's like, that's a little too long. But for 1 year, what would it be?
Oh, the first Avengers.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah.
I like it.
It all comes together then. I watch that often.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, thank you for sharing that. We always love learning, just things about folks who are on this podcast and really, what makes you and the different hobbies and things like that. Now, we are going to jump in and I'd love to kind of start with this. You work with organizations to help kind of maximize performance, transform operations, but you've also spent a lot of time in ministry, leading, shepherding a church in operations there. And so how has leading in the church kind of impacted the way that you lead and coach the organizations that you work with?
Well, there are a lot of similarities first. So when I'm working with nonprofit organizations, they have a huge volunteer base, right? Many of them do. So volunteer management, the actual revenue cycle. So the fact that we are, living and dying off of giving and offerings and and just the generosity of people, right? And that is one area that is very specific to church and nonprofits that you don't see in other industries. And I will say that my trajectory sort of was hand in hand. When I came out of, when I had my first management position, I think I was 27, somewhere along that line. And then I was also, and that was in corporate America. And at the same time, I was working to become a leader in ministry. And so they kind of worked together hand in hand. I learned lessons from church that I applied in corporate America, and I learned lessons in corporate America that I applied in church. Yeah. And so they just kind of worked hand in hand. But definitely, working with people and understanding the needs of people really was the major bridge between what I did in corporate America, because I worked for healthcare. I worked in the healthcare sector. And what was, what my role was in church. So just really learning how to work with people who are in need, who need something more than just, a handout. They need care. They need community, right? And that was a big part of how, and it still is a big part of how it is that I see my work with organizations, nonprofit and religious organizations as well.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to take a quick minute and invite you to our next Healthy Church Summit coming up on February 15th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Now, before you hit that fast forward button, let me tell you about what's coming up. The Healthy Church Summit is a virtual event centered around how to manage and lead a healthy church and how the latest in church tech can help. Now, this upcoming summit is going to dive into making the most of your time, how you as a church leader can steward your time well. We'll also look at how can you improve your church's digital presence without taking more of your time. Now, we're excited to have with us at the summit Jenny Catron from the Foresight Group, Mark McDonald, a church communication and branding expert, Carrie Mayo, our own Director of Product Management, our CEO, Chris Bacon, and it will be hosted by some familiar faces, myself and Casey. Now, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we also have some awesome giveaways for those who register and attend. You could win an iPad Pro, $500 Amazon gift card, lunch for your team, free software, Beats headphones, a Kindle. It's going to be awesome. So do me a favor, click the link in the show notes and make sure you register and join us for the Healthy Church Summit coming up on February 15th, 1 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you there.
That's perfect. So Miriam, you've worked with a lot of organizations, both corporate, nonprofit, churches. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about culture. Sometimes culture just happens. Sometimes it's intentional or unintentional. So if you can kind of put your brain in the church world, talking to church leaders, how can church leaders very intentionally build and support the culture that they want to create with intention so that they're not just letting culture happen and lead to kind of unintentional outcomes?
Well, first, I think it's important that we define culture, right? Because culture is one of those words that, we hear it, we say it, we talk about it all the time, but it means something different to everyone.
Yeah.
So when I talk about culture, I'm talking about shared practices, shared beliefs, right? And shared behaviors as well. And so when we think about those shared beliefs and behaviors and practices and things like that, the intentionality is about what we're sharing, right? So if there is a belief system or a practice or a thought or a way that we behave that's counterintuitive to what we want to have happen in our organization, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We're not intentionally building the culture that we want to see. So we have to think about culture extending not through what we say, but what we do, what we practice, how we behave, what we believe, so that in every aspect of our organization, every aspect of our church, we are modeling the culture that we want to have sustained, right? And so the intentionality is, one, understanding what that culture should look like. How is it that we behave? How is it that we believe? What are the practices that we want to have in place, right? And then from there, think about the different areas of operation within our church. And how does that match up or not match up with what we said we want to have happen, right? And from a cultural standpoint. And so it really is, we really have an opportunity to think about where we're missing in what we say we want and how we're actually living it out. And that's the sermon all by itself, right? But we can say we want something, but how is it that we're practicing? How is it that we're walking it out so that what we say actually comes to fruition? So that's the intentionality. Sitting down, thinking about it, mapping it out, dissecting, what we do, and being willing, not just able, but willing to change what it is that we see that does not align with what we would like to have happen.
Yeah, that's good. How do you, I'm curious if you were stepping into maybe a staff that you're trying to help them define that, how can you politely say, you guys haven't even started, you haven't defined that. Do you find that that's part of your work sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things that, we might operate a little differently in my organization, because one of the things that we do is that we do an assessment first, right?
Okay.
If someone comes to us and they say, oh my gosh, we feel like we're missing the mark. We have some challenges. We feel like there's initiatives that we want to get off the ground, but we start them, they fizzle out. We never move forward. We have issues with, turnover, whether it's volunteer or, paid staff. And we're just really trying to figure out how is it that we can really change our culture. Well, that first part is to assess your organization. You want to assess the church. What policies and procedures do you have? Yeah. What is let's start with strategic plan. What is the plan? What is it that you want the church to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years? And if 3 to 5 is too far, okay, 1 year, 18 months. What do you want to see? With your church, your ministry, your growth, how is it that you measure and monitor that? What are the systems that you have in place to make that happen? And so we're going to look at all those things. And then from there, we can say, in order for you to reach your goals, here are some areas where you might have challenges. Very polite way of saying that you probably already experienced these pain points now. I'm not saying anything that you haven't already heard or felt. Maybe you couldn't articulate it. Maybe you knew that something was off, but you didn't know exactly what it was. Yep. And now we can say, this is the thing, this area right here, if we could just tweak this a little bit, you guys would see such expansive growth and momentum in your ministry. But we have to really talk about this so that we can get beyond where you are today. So having those kind of assessments done, which, in the church setting, I will say this, many times there is sort of this pushback, if you will, on opening up. Right? Pulling back the layers, the covers, and looking to see what's under there, right? Opening the hood, because, our church is different. Right? And you'll hear that. Yes, our church, every church is different. However, what makes the church is many times the same, right? We have a congregation, we have giving, we have, facilities, or we're doing it virtually, but we're having a service, we're having, events. Those things are common amongst all churches for the most part, right? And so, yes, you're going to have a different way of thinking about church, being the church, living as the church. But when it comes to the operations, there are specific operations that are a part of every organization. A church is an organization, right? And so that's what we try to look at, the commonality of what the operations are that make up the church. Because if you get caught up in, doctrine, or if you get caught up in a lot of these other pieces that sit on top of the operations, then we can really, get derailed pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a ton of sense. When you were rattling off these questions, like, what about this, it almost reminds me, and this is maybe a silly example, but like when you go to the doctor and there's a triage, there's a list of really, really basic questions that seem so fundamental or almost like no-brainers, but that doctor doesn't know that, or, the nurse that's receiving you, they don't know those things about you. So they have to get some really basic, like, vital signs before we get to the diagnosis part. But when you're in the middle of you called it a pain point. I feel like that was a very polite way of saying, like, a big hot mess crisis. Like, maybe those really basic vital signs, though. What are the fundamental questions? It's probably so nice to bring in a third party and go, just give me a checklist. Like, where do I begin? Let's start at the top, work our way down. And you probably can identify those pain points pretty quickly, when it may be hard to, like, see through the mess when you're in the middle of it. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's what we say. We use that exact analogy. Like, if you're going to bring someone in, a lot of times what we do is we say, oh, this is a problem. We want to attack that one thing, put a Band-Aid on it, and keep it moving. Right. When, maybe you have an infection, not just a cut.
Yeah, that's really good.
Right. And so if we're going to treat the infection, we need to get some vitals. So we don't give you a medicine, some prescription that's going to, make it worse. What if you're allergic to penicillin, right? You don't want to give someone penicillin, although it would be good if they weren't and, they had an infection, but every body is different. Yeah. And so being able to go in and do that assessment, yes, we have a checklist. Yes, there are things that we're looking for within the operations of the church to help with, again, systematic approaches to changing culture. Right? You change, to me, and we say this here a lot, is that when it comes to cultural change, it's culture itself is embodied into the system of the organization. And you can't change it without being systematic about how it is that you dissect certain things, put them back together so that they can work well. Right. Yeah. And so it has to be, to me, a systematic approach to cultural change. Otherwise, it is very much an idea whose time is not yet come.
I love that.
Well, I know, and I can think back in work environments where, like, the systems just weren't as efficiently working as they should. Maybe they didn't have your services yet and they needed it, but, like, when operations just aren't clean, and that can create a lot of low morale for staff. When you walk into a situation and like, when you walk in, you go, man, this is low. People are not happy here. Where do you begin? And like, how can a church leader whose staff environment, or maybe their volunteer environment, I don't want to be exclusively staff, but when the people morale is so low, where do you begin to turn that around?
Well, a part of the assessment is engagement surveys. So, it's hard to walk in and pinpoint exactly why staff morale is low. So going back to our example of going to the doctor and having a diagnostic, you're going to sit in that exam room and answer some questions, but you're also getting your vitals checked. And then you're going to get some blood work done if it's really intense, right? Yeah. And so the survey itself, like if you do an engagement survey of some sort, you're looking, the questions that you're asking are about morale. How do you feel about your environment? Do you feel like you belong here? Do you feel that you can trust your leadership team? All those things matter so that you can get down to the root of the issue. One thing we don't want to do is just kind of skirt over what the real issues are. And if the leader is the issue, we have to address that.
Yeah,
sure.
Right? To say, we're not taking anything from you as a servant, as someone who can shepherd, someone who can hear from the Lord. We're not taking that away. But what we are saying is maybe there's some deficiencies in your leadership acumen, your leadership abilities. And maybe there's an opportunity to coach you through that so that you aren't creating more problems when it comes to managing people. Right? Because that's a different skill set. When you are, reading the word, you are preparing a sermon, you're able to, eloquently execute, that sermon. That's a different skill set from managing people day to day, keeping things on track, strategic planning. You know what I mean? It's just a different skill set. And so I think many times the issue is that pastors, in particular, senior leaders, feel as though they cannot share any weakness. Because if I share a weakness in one area, will you follow me in all the other areas?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And that is a hard place to be. That's a hard life to live, where you feel as though you have to be perfect in all aspects of your ministry,
right?
And not be able to say that this is something I'm not good at, but I know that I can either, brush up that skill or find the support I need.
Right.
Some pastors or senior leaders are not in that position. And that's where it's painful.
Well, and the reality is sometimes we look at the role of, especially pastor in maybe a, smaller mid-sized church where they're one of the only, or maybe they're the only with that title ever. But we tend to look at those people in those positions and believe, well, of course they should be able to do all these things. A sermon that is, amazing, friendly, engaging. They're coming over for dinner, having me over, interacting with people, leading and managing a staff. They're, HR directors. They're like all of these things that when reality is, you're like, nobody, that's a unicorn of a person, that person.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. That person doesn't exist, but you're right. Do they have the freedom to say, listen, I'm not very good at that. That's a weakness for me. And is there sort of the ability in the church or even the culture in the church to say, I'm not great at that. This person's actually going to do that because they're really good at that. And these are my strengths and my lane that I need to be in. I don't think that exists as much as maybe it should. And then we end up running into those problems.
There's an article out there, and I just cannot I just cannot remember. My mind is a little frazzled right now. But there is it's an article about church size and culture. And they talk about how there's the house church, right? And that's like, maybe one family and you have the pastor and and he's kind of going, from house to house doing a lot of work, and he's the only person that's doing any work. It's just him, right?
Yeah.
And it may be one or two, maybe three families or something like that. But then you go up the scale to maybe there's a larger church where you have more than 2 or 3 families. You have a small church gathering. Pastor's still doing a lot of the work, but it goes all the way to your large and your mega churches, where it talks about basically the role of pastor changing based on the size dynamic.
Yeah.
So it goes from the pastor being the one person that does everything to the pastor only teaching and preaching on Sunday, because there's a huge staff that does everything else, right?
Sure.
And so what we also find is that when churches grow and you begin to move from these different levels of church size, the responsibility of the pastor changes, but also the culture of the church has to change with that in order to make that possible. And sometimes the pushback is not just from the people. Sometimes it's from the pastor, right? Because they're used to being the one person who does it all. Yeah. And now I need support, and maybe there are people who are willing to support me, but I don't know how to have them help me.
Yeah.
Right? Because now we need to have at least some identifiable roles and responsibilities where it's not just me thinking about what needs to happen off the top of my head because I run day to day just doing all the things, right? Yeah. And so you have these different opportunities when growth happens where you could put certain structure in place so that it takes some of the pressure off of the senior leader and he's able to grow beyond what his own 2 hands or her own 2 hands can accomplish.
Yeah.
But that is sort of a really hard transition sometimes if the leader is not necessarily in a position where they believe that that's what they can do, or the congregation doesn't, the culture doesn't support the leader taking their hands off of certain things. Like, no, pastors should do that. No. That's what we hired you for, right?
Yeah.
And so, there are opportunities during transition to really bring in, I think, someone that can help speak to it. Doesn't have to be a consultant per se, but someone who can speak to and people hear them, right? To be able to speak to that challenge and help move that church along.
I think it's interesting that you talked about as a church grows, that those roles kind of should grow with it, but sometimes they don't. I'm probably overgeneralizing, but I feel like in especially small to mid-sized churches, there's a lot of role assumption of what kind of what Scott was saying, like what your pastor, what his job is or her job, but there's a big gap between what the congregation assumes the staff does, like for a living, what their job entails and what's actually like on a job description. Like what is my duty, your duty in corporate, that's a lot more well-defined, like marketing is not accounting and accounting is not HR, but like in the church world, sometimes that gets really, really muddy.
Yeah.
Then multiply that as the congregation maybe grows or merges, or I can only imagine how convoluted that could be very, very quickly without taking a little bit of a corporate mindset to define roles, even down to job descriptions. What do I do? What do I not do? And does my congregation have any idea what I do here? Like, it's muddy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is a real issue, especially when you start talking about defining roles and responsibilities and you hear the pushback, we're the church.
Yeah.
We're not corporate America. We don't have to have all these things in place. When if you think about when Moses was given the responsibility to build the tabernacle, God told him that he would give him expert builders.
Yeah.
Aholiab and who's the other guy? I can't think his name. It was on the tip of my tongue a little earlier. It'll probably come back to me. But these 2 builders were experts. They were experts in craft, and God would give them wisdom to do a specific work. And if you read through that that passage about who was supposed to help Moses build it, they all had defined roles and responsibilities. Even if you weren't an expert, you couldn't sew the fabric together for the tabernacle, or you couldn't, build, you didn't have the carpentry skills, or whatever the case may be, you can still give. Mm-hmm. You can give whatever you had at your home and give to the movement, because that was what you could do, right? Yeah. And so whenever I am talking to church leaders and church ministry leaders about, how it is that we could, define roles and structure, I take them back to the word. Because we talk of, the word has that. The Bible talks about, having those experts who are doing specific roles in building the tabernacle. So I think that is an important distinction to make, that we should be better than corporate. Yeah. We're not corporate.
That's good.
Yeah, it's really good.
And so the structure helps us to do that.
Yeah. I think one of the things that kept coming to mind as we were kind of talking about this with roles, expectations, especially that a congregation might have of a pastor or leader, is that sometimes the church can be guilty of kind of leading in a way that prioritize ministry and the fruit that we want to see above the emotional, sometimes mental health of those who are leading, of those who are, in that role of pastor. So in your experience, what you've seen, because I know you've both been in the church leading, right? You've had those roles and you've worked with church leaders, worked with leaders beyond. I'm curious, how do we kind of break this pattern of saying, we want to see the fruit, we want to see that, and maybe prioritizing that above emotional health, mental health, rest, that sort of thing?
Well, the one thing we have to really, think about is the fact that let me back up to say this. Back prior to the pandemic, I want to say 2019, 18, 19, we started hearing about the suicides of pastors. Do you remember that? Yeah. The suicide rate of pastors. And it was increasing, and some very notable folks were dying because they were not emotionally healthy. Mental health was not an area where pastors feel as though they can express a need to have care in. And as we talked about earlier, that, the senior leader tends to be put in a position where they have no weaknesses, no faults, in order to be followed, when we're asking people to be more than human, to be a pastor. And in order to break that cycle, we really have to start to discuss what it means to pastor. And what is the balance in all of that, right? Pastors have to be willing to talk about that. But I know that it comes at a cost if they're the only ones talking about it, which means that the congregation needs to be taught. The congregation needs to be exposed. The congregation needs to understand what it looks like for one person to carry so much weight that's not meant for them to carry. I don't think you're going to find an example in the Bible where the pastor is doing all the things that we're asking pastors to do today. I don't think you're going to find that. And so when we are taught better, we can sometimes do better. But it has to be part of the teaching to a congregation about what it means to pastor. And that's not the conversation that we've been having. So if I'm going to talk to an organization, a church specifically, about, structure and operational efficiency, we're going to talk about balance. We're going to talk about roles. We're going to talk about what it means to be healthy. Because at the end of the day, if we're not healthy as leaders, whenever, and this is sad to say, we'll be gone, but someone will replace us the next day. Right? The pastoral search committee might take a little while, but they'll find somebody. But it's sad that it comes down to that. We really need to be thinking about how it is that we have these conversations, as difficult as they may be. Because listen, from what I could tell, and you guys may be seeing this too, there's another generation coming along who will not put up with the same.
Yep.
They will come in, they will do the ministry work they believe God has called them to do. And if they get a lot of resistance, they'll do something else.
Yeah.
They're not the ones who will sit back and just take it and just grin and bear it and feel as though this is just the way it has to be. This generation that's coming up behind us has a different tolerance for ministry strain.
Yeah.
I'll say it that way.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
I think that's a great conversation. That is probably a whole nother episode, but we talk a lot about work-life balance, but those in full-time ministry, I think often feel like, well, yeah, but I don't get that. Like that doesn't come with my job, that must be great, but that's not what we get to do. So when you were saying, you said it perfectly, and I wanted to write it down. If we know better, we can do better. If we learn better, we can do better. I pictured at least one ministry leader listening to this and just went, yes, please. And without that, what's at stake of losing an entire generation of people who are called to ministry, but are just exhausted.
Exhausted.
So, yeah, we've got to do better. I think that's really good.
I think my husband was reading either a post or a blog or something like that, where a pastor was basically saying that for $60,000 a year, I'm not sure which denomination, but some denominations, have a set salary for pastors. And he said for $60,000 a year, I'm the HR director. Right. I'm the community services director, the volunteer leader. And he just went down the entire list of all the things that's expected of him as a pastor for $60,000 a year.
Yeah. Each one of them have their own bachelor's or master's degree required to do that out in the real world.
Right.
So, yeah.
So when we think about it that way, what are we asking our pastors to do?
Yeah.
Because how much time are they spending on administrative oversight and sometimes burden, where they don't have enough time to spend in the Word.
Yeah.
They don't have enough time to dedicate to study and prayer. And yet we still want a super sermon on Sunday, right? Yeah. So where's the balance in all of that? And the other part to me is it's not enough to have the 5 people who always are worried about pastor and praying for them.
Yeah.
Or the fringe, right? It's just a few people who are always thinking about what do they need? How can I pray for them? What support can I give? It needs to be broader than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so again, how are we advocating for our full-time ministry leaders? How is it that we are incorporating that into our teaching, right? And just exposing our congregation to different ways of ministry, so that we aren't stuck in one way of ministering that is literally killing pastors.
Yeah,
man, it's such an important conversation. And Miriam, I'm thankful for your experience and your boldness in being willing to, I think you said it earlier, look under the hood to the organizational health of our churches and our pastors and their staffs and volunteers. So that leads us into the question that we ask everyone that comes on to the podcast. You may have already answered this, but in your professional and personal experience, what is one essential component of a healthy church?
Kind of narrow it down to one.
One of the many, maybe, but
right.
Well, a healthy church has a healthy respect for the work. It's not easy.
Yeah.
We're living in a day and age where the church is competing with so many other interests.
Yeah.
The work of reaching, the work of teaching, the work of studying, the work of praying, the work of actually executing with excellence, the work of, leading in ministry. The work is hard. The work is heavy. And a healthy church has a healthy respect for the work.
Yeah.
Which means that we all have a part to play in making sure that the church is healthy, right? It's not just one person's responsibility. It's all of our responsibility.
Yeah.
And a healthy church has a healthy respect for that.
Yeah. Well said. Very well said. We're gonna move into what we call our final five. These are kind of a little more rapid fire, jumping into those. If that's cool. The first one's easy, but they get harder. Okay, just a forewarning. So first one is what's one book that you'd recommend to church leaders?
One book that I think, and this is something that probably church leaders would not think about reading, is a book about virtual culture.
Yeah.
Creating virtual culture. Because, and I will say that smaller churches probably have had sort of maybe have a leading edge on what it looks like to not have full-time staff and to have to coordinate people who are not necessarily in an office building, right? Yeah. But now that we are moving, and again, the pandemic, even though it changed a lot of things, we're not done changing yet. There are still things that are happening rapid fire like in our culture, in our society right now. But knowing that there's an opportunity for us to manage people remotely, and what does that look like? And how do you do that? Especially when we're talking about, providing and creating more virtual services and atmosphere. There's a book called Virtual Culture. And if I were in my office and had my books around me, I'd be able to tell you who wrote that book.
Is it Brian Miles?
Yes.
Okay. I would love to take credit for just knowing that, but Google helped me with that. So wonderful.
So yes, Brian Miles.
Cool.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. We'll put a link. We'll put a link for people to be able to get that for sure.
Yep. And there's another book recently that came out about habits. And I can't think of that, but when I do, I'm going to send it to you so that you can also post that book as well.
Is it Atomic Habits?
Yep, Atomic Habits.
2 for 2. That one I did know because I've read it. It's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
That book helped me tremendously.
Yeah.
And I'd say for a ministry leader, if you're trying to build some healthy hedges, right? So you need to build, these healthy hedges so that you can have healthy, like a balance, work-life balance. You want to do that systematically and build some habits, right? Maybe it's taking time for yourself, 30 minutes a day. Maybe it's, taking time to pray, whatever it is. That Atomic Habits book was so rich to me that there are certain things I put in place like immediately. So yes.
Love it.
That's good. And we'll give you a lot of grace, Miriam. I don't know if we told everybody, you are in the middle of a move, you are in limbo. So you get a free pass on not remembering things.
Thank you very much.
Books nearby. Yes. No problem.
I can't remember anything. I've got no excuse for that. So you get a freebie.
I've moved, for the listeners, I moved from one state to another state. My office is packed up in storage, and I'm working, from a very temporary space today. That move happened Thursday and Friday of last week. So this is like 2 days later.
You're making it work.
And you made great. Time to be on our podcast. I mean, you might win the Guest of the Year award. We'll see. The year just started, but we'll see, because that's awesome.
Well, thank you very much. And for your listeners, I do apologize for being so scattered today, but hopefully you're getting something good out of this podcast.
Well, the last 4 questions require no reference, just your brain. Okay. So these should be fine. Okay. So number 2, what is the last thing that you listened to? Music, podcast, book, whatever.
It was a sermon on Sunday.
Nice.
There you go. Yeah. That's a good answer right there.
And I mean, today, well, I know that this is going to be a timeless podcast, but today is Monday. Yeah. Yesterday, I listened to my husband taught yesterday. He preached, and he taught on a sermon. The title was "You Don't Know Him Like I Do," and it was great. And I'm probably botching that title now that I think about it, but that was the last thing I listened to.
I love it. All right, number 3, what's your favorite piece of technology? And we do have a rule, you can't see your phone. Sorry.
Well, I didn't know this until the move. My watch.
Ooh, yeah.
I have Apple Watch. Yeah. And for some reason, I couldn't charge it one day. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know how many steps I had. Oh my gosh, what time is it? I was really struggling. Am I meeting my activity goal? I don't know. I have my watch.
I feel that deeply. Yeah.
and because my watch is connected to my phone. So am I moving? I don't have my phone on me. It's like somewhere packed up or in my purse or something. But the phone calls or the alerts, they're coming to my watch.
Yeah.
Who would have thunk it, right?
It's important.
I understand. All right. Number 4, is there a quote, a piece of wisdom, some great advice that has stuck with you throughout the years?
I really, okay, yes. So, and just a tiny little story here. I met my husband at church. He was the youth pastor. And at the time I was, and this is sort of it was a new space for my pastor as well, but I was walking to be a deacon. Mm-hmm. And when we got married, we dated for 6 weeks and got married.
Wow.
We've been married for it'll be 22 years this year.
I love it.
Wow.
But I was so concerned about what it was going to be like to be a first lady. Like, because I knew my husband had a senior pastor call in his life, but at that time he was operating as a youth pastor. And so I remember my pastor sitting me down and he said, listen, doesn't matter what role you eventually take on in life. The important thing is to be yourself. Mm-hmm. Because you're going to bring that into whatever role, wherever hat you have to put on. Yeah. Just be yourself. And even now, the roles keep changing, right? Mm-hmm. So I went from, first lady to now I'm an executive pastor. I am a CEO. I've had many titles, professor, whatever. Mm-hmm. All the roles came, but I was still me. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. And you had to live with you. No matter what hat you're wearing. Yeah. So you might as well be yourself when you're wearing those hats.
That's good.
And that has stuck with me over the last 20 plus years.
Yeah. That's really good. All right. Last one of the 5. What's one thing that you'd like to communicate to our audience of church leaders?
You're not alone. My husband and I he's been a senior pastor of an established church. It's over 100 years old. Mm-hmm. We planted a church. We've moved and we'll probably plant another church. And the work is hard. Sometimes it's thankless from people. But you're not by yourself. We may not talk about the struggles because, truth be told, who wants to hear a pastor talk about how hard the work is? Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, you're not by yourself. And if you feel as though you are by yourself, it's time to find a community.
Yeah.
Where you can have those conversations, where you can find, some camaraderie. Even if it's just to commiserate, you need a community.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
as a church leader. And so my prayer is that you find that space. Yeah. That you find a space and a place where you belong, where you can, let your hair down if you still have it. I know my husband doesn't have his. Right there. And really just breathe. And be able to be yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that is my prayer, my desire for you.
I love that.
That's good.
Well, that's a great note to end on. Before we do, though, can you just give people some direction if they want to find more info about 180 Management Group, about maybe connect with you? Like, where can they do that?
Sure. So if you want to find more information about 180 Management Group, you can always go to our website, which is 180managementgroup.com. Cool. So 180managementgroup.com. And there you can also, if you want to have an introductory call or something like that, you could just schedule a call. And if you want to talk to me, I think the options are operations consulting, leadership consulting, or speaking training, but I'm an operations consultant. So if you choose that option, you'll get to me somehow or another. Nice. But if you also can reach me on LinkedIn, Miriam Dicks, our company, 180 Management Group, is out there on LinkedIn. We try to post regularly, inbox me there, cool. Link up with me, connect with me there. Definitely we'll get back to you and respond to you. We're pretty responsive as an organization. So that's how you can get in touch.
Awesome. Well, we'll link to all of that in the show notes for sure, but just so appreciate you taking the time, especially in the midst of moving and, a bunch of other stuff on your plate, for being here with us today, and for really, I think, encouraging, but also challenging church leaders in some really good ways. I think you did that. We're really thankful for it. And we're thankful for those of you who have tuned in and listened or watched today, for giving us some time. We hope that it's been helpful. Again, our goal is to empower healthy churches through these conversations. So we really hope that we've done that today. If we have, we'd encourage you to leave a review or a comment, subscribe, do all the things that you do with podcasts. Share this with somebody, send them a link. We would love for these conversations to get into more people's ears and hopefully to help more church leaders. We're grateful for you, and we'll see you next time.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple-to-use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.